picture this. It's a completely ordinary, totally unremarkable day. October 16th, 1869.
Right, just a standard autumn morning.
Yeah, exactly. You are standing in Cardiff, New York. It's this small, very quiet farming community nestled in the Onondaga Valley.
The kind of place where everybody knows everybody's business.
Oh, absolutely. The biggest news on any given day is like the weather or whose cows got out. The air has that crisp, sharp autumnal bite to it.
Perfect weather for physical labor, really.
Which is exactly what's happening. Behind a barn on a farm owned by a guy named William Newell, though everyone calls him Stub Newell, there is a sound.
Just that rhythmic, totally unglamorous sound of shovels.
Right. Shovels biting into packed dirt. Two men, Gideon Emmons and Henry Nichols, they've been hired to dig a well.
And we should clarify, well digging in 1869 is pure brute force labor.
Oh, it is sweaty, tedious work. There is absolutely nothing about this morning that suggests the earth they're moving is about to, like, shift the cultural foundation of the entire country.
Yeah, because there is zero expectation of discovery when you dig a well.
Right, you're just looking for water.
Exactly. You dig a hole, you hit the water table, you get paid your modest wage, maybe find a cool rock or some old roots, but you definitely aren't looking for history.
But then, about 3 feet down, Gideon's shovel hits something.
And it doesn't sound right.
No, it doesn't yield like the soft topsoil, but it also doesn't give that sharp, ringing glance you get when steel strikes a normal field stone, you know?
Right. It has this dull, heavy, massive resonance to it.
Solid. But even through the handle of the shovel, it feels shaped.
Which immediately makes you pause.
So they do. They pause, they clear away the dirt with their hands, they keep digging, but like much more carefully now.
And slowly and possibly, this massive foot emerges from the damp earth.
A foot, and then a muscular calf. Over the next hour, they meticulously unearth an entire figure.
I mean, just imagine the adrenaline.
It's over 10 feet long. It weighs nearly 3,000 pounds. It looks exactly like an enormous ancient man turned to solid stone.
Lying there as if he had been buried in absolute agony for millennia.
The visceral impact of that moment, I mean, it's hard to even overstate it.
Oh, for sure. You're expecting mud and rocks, and instead you were staring at a petrified colossus in your own backyard.
It's the kind of visual that instantly short-circuits your brain's logical pathways.
It really is. It looks human, but on a scale that defies everything you understand about biology.
Well, welcome to our deep dive. Today, we are looking at a massive stack of historical accounts, period newspaper reports, scientific journals from the 19th century, and modern museum records.
And we are using all of that to unpack what has been called America's biggest petrified lie.
The Cardiff Giant.
It's such a wild story.
Okay, let's unpack this. Our mission today is to figure out exactly how a 10-foot stone man ended up in a hole in upstate New York.
And maybe more importantly, why millions of people bought into the illusion.
Because I want to set the table for you right now. This isn't just a quirky historical anecdote about a fake statue.
No, not at all. It is a literal masterclass in the psychology of mass credulity.
It's an exploration of how we selectively process information. And a story about a hoax so wildly successful that a rival showman eventually decided to counterfeit the counterfeit.
Which is still my favorite part of the whole thing.
Oh, we will definitely get there. But this narrative forces us to look in the mirror.
Right. We like to think of ourselves as these rational creatures, but this story exposes how aggressively we will ignore glaring red flags if a narrative validates our deeply held worldview.
So I want you, the listener, to put yourself in the boots of those well diggers, or the townsfolk of Cardiff who came running when the news spread.
Just imagine what you would do if you found something literally earth-shattering buried behind your house.
Think about how quickly you might abandon all logic, all critical thinking, if the discovery in the dirt validated everything you already believed about the history of the world.
That is the core tension here, because the giant didn't just appear out of the ether.
No, it was a deliberate, meticulously engineered trap set for the human mind.
And to understand the mechanics of that trap, we really have to understand the architect who built it.
And the incredibly, honestly, almost unbelievably petty reason he decided to build it in the first place.
The pettiness is just off the charts.
So we have to rewind the clock. We are moving backward from that shocking discovery in October 1869, back 2 years to 1867.
This is where we meet George Hull.
Yes, George Hull. He is a cigar manufacturer from Binghamton, New York, and he is a noted vocal religious skeptic.
Which In the cultural landscape of the 1860s, being a vocal skeptic makes Hull a bit of a provocateur.
Right, because this is post-Civil War America.
Exactly. The country has just been torn apart by unimaginable trauma. People are desperately seeking certainty and comfort.
And at the same time, you have this massive intellectual collision happening, right?
Oh, a huge one. Charles Darwin published On the Origin of Species in 1859, so just a decade prior.
The scientific world is beginning to embrace evolutionary theory and the idea of a much, much older Earth.
While the religious landscape is doubling down on biblical literalism as a source of stability.
And Hull is a guy who just thrives on that friction.
He loves it.
Yeah.
He doesn't just quietly disagree with the prevailing dogma. He seeks it out. He actively engages with it.
Which leads us to Ackley, Iowa in 1867. Hull is visiting his sister.
And he ends up crossing paths with a traveling Methodist preacher named Reverend Mr. Turk.
And they get into it. I mean, they get into this fiery, hours-long, late-night debate.
Over a very specific passage, right?
Yeah, Genesis 6.4, the passage that says, and I quote, "There were giants in the earth in those days."
And Reverend Turk is arguing for a strictly literal interpretation.
Right. Turp says giants were real, physical beings. They walk the earth. End of story.
And Hull is arguing that this has to be metaphorical, or at least that it's just not scientifically plausible given the laws of biology and gravity.
But Hull is hitting a brick wall. He is getting absolutely nowhere with this preacher.
Which is so frustrating. He experiences this profound frustration with what he perceives as just blind gullibility.
Because he is presenting logic, and the Reverend is presenting faith.
And those two languages simply do not translate to one another.
But instead of just walking away, which is what normal people do, Hull leans into a fascinating psychological pivot.
What's fascinating here is that he decides to become like a rogue 19th century behavioral psychologist.
Okay, wait, I have to stop here. I need to highlight the sheer, unadulterated absurdity of this escalation.
It's pretty extreme.
When I lose a frustrating argument, or I feel like I can't break through someone's entrenched worldview, I might stew about it for a day.
Right, or you think of the perfect comeback in the shower 3 days later.
Exactly. George Hull decides to manufacture a 3,000-pound prehistoric man, bury it in the ground, and wait for people to find it.
It's a lot of effort for an argument.
That is like faking a moon landing in your basement just to win a neighborhood dispute about astronomy. The level of spite and dedication is genuinely awe-inspiring. Most people don't have the energy to hold a grudge for a week, let alone industrialize one.
Well, it is the ultimate extravagant, I told you so.
Truly.
But you have to look at his methodology. Hull isn't acting out of religious conviction, and he isn't trying to start a new religion.
No, he is setting up a sociological experiment.
He understands the climate of the late 1860s. He knows the public is caught in this tug of war between geology and traditional faith.
And he recognizes that if he can provide a piece of physical evidence that seemingly bridges that gap, something that looks like a geological fossil but confirms a biblical narrative, the public will absolutely devour it.
He is betting everything on the premise that people will eagerly, happily believe a colossal lie if it just nods along with what they already think.
He wants to prove Reverend Turk wrong, not by arguing with him anymore, but by proving that Turk's followers will fall for a literal rock.
Just because it fits their narrative.
And he is willing to prove this point regardless of the financial cost, the time commitment, or the immense logistical nightmare of executing it.
And it was a nightmare.
Yeah.
He's about to embark on a premeditated, highly orchestrated fraud that requires the logistics of a military operation.
Which brings us to the execution phase. Because having the idea to fake a giant to win an argument is one thing. That's just a late-night thought experiment.
Actually, building a convincing, ancient, 10-foot-tall, petrified man in the 1860s is an entirely different beast.
How do you even begin to do that? Where do you even source the material for a fake giant?
Well, you start with the raw materials, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
And crucially, you start far away from where you intend to spring the trap.
Right, operational security.
Exactly. Hull is smart enough to know he can't just go to a local quarry in upstate New York. If he does, the locals will remember a massive block of stone being hauled away by George Hull.
So where does he go?
He stays in Iowa, near where the argument took place. He goes to Fort Dodge, Iowa, which is known for its massive gypsum deposits.
Okay, so he goes to Fort Dodge.
Yeah, and he actually purchases an acre of land, ostensibly to mine it, and he commissions a massive multi-ton block of raw gypsum.
I want to dig into the material choice here. Why gypsum? Why not, like, granite or marble?
Gypsum is brilliant for this specific con, for a few chemical and physical reasons. First, it's a relatively soft sulfate mineral.
Soft meaning easy to carve.
Yeah, on the Mohs scale of mineral hardness, it's about a 2. You can literally scratch it with your fingernail.
Oh, wow. I didn't realize it was that soft.
It is. That means it is highly workable for stonecutters. They don't need diamond-tipped tools to sculpt it. Standard chisels and rasps will do the job really quickly.
Okay, that makes sense for the labor side.
And second, gypsum has a slight translucence and a veining pattern to it.
So it looks a bit like flesh.
Exactly. When polished or treated, it can mimic the striated look of human musculature and bone structure much better than a solid, uniform block of granite wood. It has this organic quality.
But it's still incredibly heavy. Even if it's soft to carve, we are talking about a 5-ton block of raw rock.
Oh, it was a massive headache to move.
The logistics of moving this in 1868, just after the Civil War, when the Transcontinental Railroad isn't even fully completed yet, the physical toll must have been staggering.
It was. He has to get this 5-ton block from a quarry in Fort Dodge to the nearest railhead. The first wagon he hires completely breaks down under the weight.
Of course it does.
So he has to hire a custom-built, heavy-duty wagon drawn by a massive team of horses just to move it a few miles.
And a giant block of stone like that draws attention, right?
Yes, people ask questions. So he develops an elaborate cover story.
What does he tell them?
He tells anyone who asks that the stone is for a patriotic monument to Abraham Lincoln that is being erected in New York.
That is a phenomenal cover story for 1868.
Right. Nobody's going to question a memorial to the martyred president.
It gives him a perfect excuse for the secrecy, the expense, and the destination. So he gets it on a train, but he doesn't ship it to New York.
No, he ships it to Chicago.
Why Chicago?
Chicago is a booming industrial hub at this point. It's the perfect place to hide a secret project in plain sight.
Got it. Lots of noise, lots of workshops.
Exactly. Once it arrives, he rents a barn, and he hires a team of stonecutters.
And this is where operational security becomes paramount again.
He swears these men to strict secrecy. He directs them to carve a 10-foot likeness of a human figure, but he gives them very specific artistic direction.
He doesn't want it to look like art.
Right.
Right.
It shouldn't look like a classical Greek or Roman statue. It can't have idealized proportions or a heroic posture.
Needs to look organic.
Organic, agonizing, and ancient.
He tells them to make it look like a man who died in terrible pain.
Yes. They carve the giant with its legs slightly drawn up, its hands clutching its stomach, its face concerted.
And I read that he even served as the physical model for the stonecutters.
He did. He would lie on the floor in these agonizing poses so they could capture the tension in the musculature.
That is such a brilliant touch.
It really is. Because if it looked peaceful, it would just look like a statue. By making it look like it died in agony, it triggers an empathetic response from the viewer.
It makes it feel like a once-living creature that was trapped in some cataclysmic event.
Like the biblical flood.
Okay, but I'm looking at this critically. A freshly carved block of gypsum, no matter how agonized the pose, looks exactly like what it is, a freshly carved rock.
Very true.
You have bright white chisel marks. You have sharp edges. It doesn't look like a petrified corpse that has been buried in the dirt for thousands of years. How does he bridge that gap?
This is where Hull transitions from a project manager into basically a special effects master.
Okay, what does he do?
He understands that weathering is the key to the illusion. So he brings in sulfuric acid.
Sulfuric acid on gypsum. What is the chemical play there?
Gypsum is calcium sulfate dihydrate. When you apply sulfuric acid to it, it violently attacks the surface of the stone.
Like it melts it.
It eats away the softer material between the veins, creating a rugged, pitted, darkened surface.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it basically simulates centuries of water erosion and soil acidity in a matter of days. It gives the stone a dark, varied, ancient patina, and it takes off all those sharp edges left by the chisels.
That is incredibly clever. But he didn't stop the acid. There is this detail in the historical record that I find so delightfully unhinged.
The pores.
Yes. To simulate the porous nature of human skin, he allegedly takes a wooden block, drives dozens of steel darning needles through it, and has the stonecutters pound the entire surface of the giant with this makeshift tool.
He is literally giving the rock pores.
He is artificially creating the texture of skin. He is using movie prop techniques a full century before Hollywood even exists.
And he also rubs soot and ink into the acid-worn crevices to make it look like ancient dirt is permanently bonded to the figure.
So his masterpiece of deception is finally ready. It weighs nearly 3,000 pounds now that it's carved.
And now he has to transport this massive fake corpse from Chicago back to New York, completely in secret.
He boxes it up in a massive crate, labels it as heavy machinery, ships it by rail, and then it's loaded onto a wagon in upstate New York.
He moves it to his cousin's farm, William Newell, in Cardiff.
They dig a massive trench behind the barn in the dead of night, and they bury it in November 1868.
And this brings us to what might be the single most crucial and impressive element of the entire con.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Let's unpack this part, because the discipline here is mind-blowing. He buries it in November 1868, and then he does absolutely nothing.
Nothing at all.
For nearly a full year.
That level of restraint is astounding.
It really is. Think about the psychology of a prankster. When you set a trap, the impulse is to spring it immediately. You want the payoff.
But Hull understands geology, and he understands human suspicion.
If you bury a 3,000-pound object and immediately find it the next day, the stratigraphy of the dirt is completely wrong.
Exactly. The soil is freshly turned, it's aerated, it's loose. The ground hasn't settled.
And more dangerously, the locals might remember seeing a massive groaning wagon lumbering through town the night before.
If you think about the analogy of a sleeper agent in espionage, Hull basically planted a geological sleeper agent.
Yeah. If I bury a small time capsule in my yard today, it looks like a fresh, suspicious grave for months. You can see exactly where the sod was cut.
Right. By letting a full year pass, Hull ensures that nature does his cover-up work for him.
He uses the weather.
He utilizes the freeze-thaw cycles of an upstate New York winter. The heavy snows come and bury the farm. Then the spring rains arrive, turning the ground to mud and naturally compacting the earth around the giant.
Filling in every single chisel mark and needle pore with local soil.
Then the summer sun bakes the ground solid. The soil stratigraphy above the giant settles completely naturally, making it look as though it has been undisturbed for centuries.
And he is relying on the decay of human memory, too.
Oh, absolutely. A year later, nobody in Cardiff remembers a strange wagon passing through in the middle of the night last November. The context has been completely neutralized.
He sank all this money, thousands of dollars, which was an absolute fortune, all this effort, orchestrated this incredible secret transportation network across state lines, buried the thing, and then just went back to Binghamton to make cigars for 12 months.
Just sitting there, rolling tobacco, knowing what is underneath his cousin's farm.
Just waiting.
It proves that he understood that the authenticity of the discovery wouldn't just rely on the object itself.
The giant could be carved perfectly, but if the context of the discovery was suspicious, the hoax would fail.
The unassailable normalcy of the context was his strongest weapon. It had to be discovered by accident during a routine task by men who had no idea what they were looking for.
Which brings us right back to our sweaty well diggers Gideon and Henry in October 1869.
The trap is perfectly set.
The bait has aged for a year, the dirt is compacted into a rock-hard seal, and their shovels strike gypsum.
And what happens next is a fascinating study in human nature and raw, opportunistic capitalism.
Oh, capitalism at its finest.
Because the moment it's pulled from the ground, cousin William Newell doesn't run to the authorities. He doesn't call a university or the State Geological Survey.
No, he leans instantly into the grift.
He sees dollar signs in the dirt.
Immediately, Newell erects a massive tent right over the pit. He doesn't even bother fully excavating the giant.
It's just lying there in its earthen grave, which, honestly, is brilliant staging.
It adds to the theatricality, right? Yeah. It looks like an active archaeological dig site.
So Newell puts up a sign and starts charging 25 cents admission for anyone who wants to look at it.
And the demand is immediate.
The word of mouth is so explosive that he quickly doubles the price to 50 cents.
Thousands of people are flocking from across the region, clogging the dirt roads of Cardiff with wagons and buggies.
We really need to contextualize that price. 50 cents in 1869 is not an insignificant amount of money.
No, for a farmer, a laborer, or a factory worker, that might be a substantial fraction of a day's wage.
And they are literally lining up, hundreds deep,
right,
handing over hard-earned cash to look at a rock in a muddy hole.
But you have to realize, to them, it isn't a rock. It is a profound, life-altering validation.
Exactly. When the public arrives at Newell's farm, they don't peer into the tent, look at the giant, and immediately cry, fake.
Instead, the public fractures into these very earnest, passionate factions, debating exactly what kind of miracle they are looking at.
The debate isn't, is this real or a hoax? The debate is, what kind of incredibly important real thing is this?
You essentially have three main camps that form instantly.
Right. Camp 1 is influenced by the recent discoveries of ancient megafauna like mastodons.
So they believe it is a fossilized ancient human the ultimate missing link in the geological record.
Then you have Camp 2, and this group is fueled by the exact religious fervor George Hull was trying to mock.
They believe it is a genuine, biblically consistent giant, proof positive that the book of Genesis is literal history.
And Camp 3 thinks it's an authentic ancient statue carved by early indigenous inhabitants of the continent, maybe some lost civilization.
This is where Hull's genius as a manipulator really shines.
He provided a blank canvas that was just detailed enough to look authentic, but vague enough that different groups could project their own desperately held beliefs onto it.
If you were deeply religious, you saw a biblical giant punished by the flood.
If you were interested in the burgeoning science of paleontology, you saw a fossil.
It perfectly appealed to the dominant cultural fascinations and anxieties of the 1860s.
But wait, hold on. I can hear people asking or avert. I understand why a farmer with no formal education might think a rock is a petrified giant. But surely the experts stepped in and shut this down, right?
Right. It's 1869. We have state geologists, we have Ivy League scientists, we have anatomists.
Gypsum is a sedimentary mineral. Bone is calcium phosphate.
You're telling me credentialed geologists in 1869 couldn't tell the difference between a carved block of calcium sulfate and a fossilized skeleton? Were they just totally incompetent, or what are we missing here?
It's a great question, and it's a critical failure of authority that acts as an accelerant for the hoax.
So why did they fail?
You have to consider the environment in which these early experts were examining the giant.
You mean the tent?
Exactly. It's in a dimly lit tent. The giant is half buried in mud and water. The lighting is terrible.
And crucially, Newell isn't letting anyone take a hammer and chisel to it to take a core sample.
No, of course not. They are relying on visual inspection in terrible conditions.
Add to that the intense crowd psychology. You have hundreds of people outside the tent murmuring in awe.
Even experts are human. They can be swayed by the electric atmosphere of the moment.
So, credentialed men of science come out to the farm. They peer down into this muddy hole, and they offer these very serious, credulous statements to the press in favor of its antiquity.
State geologist and declares it the most remarkable object yet brought to light in this country.
He leaned toward it being an ancient statue, not a fossil, but he still validated its antiquity.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, that early legitimation by authorities is the shield Hull needed.
When an expert, a credentialed geologist, stands by the pit and says, "This is of profound antiquity," it creates an impenetrable permission structure for the general public.
The average person in upstate New York might have been slightly skeptical at first, but if the state geologist tells him it's an ancient wonder, who is he to argue?
It shuts down the critical faculties of the masses.
It validates the ticket price.
Their endorsement takes this from a local oddity to a nationwide sensation. Trains are organizing special routes just to drop people off near Cardiff.
And a nationwide sensation means big, big money.
At this point, the sheer scale of the crowds becomes entirely unmanageable for William Newell's small farm. The infrastructure of Cardiff cannot handle it.
This attracts the attention of a syndicate of investors from the nearby city of Syracuse.
These are wealthy, pragmatic businessmen, bankers, real estate moguls.
And they are completely unaware that it's a hoax. They look at the daily attendance numbers, they look at the 50-cent admission fees, and they see an absolute gold mine.
They see a venture capital opportunity.
Precisely. They approach Hull and Newell and offer to buy a 2/3 ownership stake in the giant.
So they can move it to Syracuse, put it in a proper exhibition hall, and accommodate much larger crowds.
The figure that is widely cited in historical accounts for this buyout is roughly $23,000.
I really want to emphasize the scale of that number. Think about the equivalent of $23,000 in 1869.
Depending on how you calculate inflation and purchasing power, we are talking about roughly $500,000 today.
This wasn't just a local sideshow anymore. It was a venture capital-backed startup built entirely on a practical joke.
George Hull set out to win a theological argument, and he ended up a phenomenally wealthy man.
He weaponized confirmation bias and literally turned it into capital. He proved his point and got paid a fortune to do it.
But this level of success, this kind of explosive, cash-generating nationwide phenomenon, is impossible to hide.
It is going to attract attention from the heavyweights of the entertainment industry.
And in the 19th century American entertainment landscape, there was no bigger heavyweight than Phineas Taylor Barnum.
P.T. Barnum, The king of the sideshow, the master of the spectacle, the founder of the Museum of Curiosities.
When a nationwide sensation is drawing huge crowds and printing money in upstate New York, Barnum naturally wants a piece of the action.
He sees the giant in Syracuse, he sees the lines stretching around the block, he does the math on the profit margins, and he makes his move.
Barnum operates on a very simple business model. Own the attraction, control the narrative.
He approaches the Syracuse syndicate and offers to buy or lease the giant.
He offers a very substantial amount of money, reportedly up to $50,000 for a temporary lease.
But the syndicate refuses him.
They know what they have. They are making a fortune hand over fist, and they have absolutely no intention of sharing their golden goose with P.T. Barnum.
And this is where the story elevates from a great historical hoax into absolute, pure, unadulterated comedy.
Because Barnum is completely unfazed by the rejection. He doesn't accept defeat.
He doesn't go look for another curiosity. Instead, he executes one of the most audacious, hilarious pivots in the history of American business.
He realizes something fundamental about his audience. He doesn't actually need the physical giant. He just needs the idea of the giant.
So he secretly hires his own team of sculptors.
Using a wax impression that someone managed to sneak, along with detailed visual descriptions from newspaper reports, he has them create a plaster replica of the Cardiff Giant.
He manufactures a fake of the fake.
He builds a knockoff. And he doesn't just quietly display it somewhere else, under a different name.
He puts his plaster knockoff on display right in New York City, the media and financial capital of the country, at his American Museum.
And he boldly, loudly advertises his version as the real Cardiff Giant.
He takes out massive advertisements in the newspapers declaring that the giant currently sitting in Syracuse, which is the original fake, is actually a forgery.
And that his brand new plaster replica is the genuine original artifact.
The genius of Barnum's audacity cannot be overstated. He didn't try to expose the Syracuse Giant as a hoax, because if he proved it was just carved gypsum, he would destroy the public interest, which ruins the market for everyone.
Instead, he hijacked the revenue stream. By loudly calling the other one a fake, he manufactured a public controversy.
It's brilliant. This is like someone pirating a counterfeit designer handbag, setting up a shop directly across the street from the first counterfeiter, and loudly accusing them of copyright infringement. It's absolute chaos.
We have two groups of wealthy men, both knowingly displaying completely fake statues, both furiously accusing the other of being a fraud in the national press.
And the American public is paying admission to see both of them to make up their own minds.
It created an absolute media frenzy. The Syracuse syndicate was furious. They even tried to get a legal injunction against Barnum to stop him from displaying his fake.
Which creates this wonderful, absurd legal paradox for the courts suing someone for faking your fake.
How did 19th century intellectual property law even handle that? You can't copyright a fossil, right?
Exactly. The syndicate was claiming the original giant was a genuine ancient artifact.
The courts essentially looked at it and said, if it's a real petrified man, it's a product of nature, and you cannot patent or copyright a product of nature. Therefore, anyone is free to make a replica of it.
In order to win the injunction and protect their copyright, the syndicate would have had to admit in open court that the giant was a modern sculpture, a piece of art that they owned.
But if they admitted it was a modern sculpture, they would instantly destroy the mystery that was driving their ticket sales.
They were completely trapped by their own lie. Barnum found the perfect legal loophole.
But look, at this point, the bubble has to burst, right? Science has to catch up eventually.
You can't just have two fake stone giants dominating the American consciousness forever, especially with the Gilded Age approaching and scientific methods improving.
Right. And science does finally catch up. The initial awe wears off, and crucially, the environment changes.
The giant is moved out of the muddy pit on Newell's farm and into proper, well-lit exhibition halls in Syracuse and eventually New York.
Once it's out of the dirt, the real experts finally get a close, unhindered look at it.
Othniel C. Marsh, one of the most prominent and rigorous paleontologists of the era from Yale University, comes to examine it.
And Marsh does not pull his punches. He is not swayed by the crowd or the lighting.
Not at all. Marsh represents the new guard of rigorous empirical science. He performs a detailed morphological and geological analysis.
And his findings reveal exactly what George Hull did. First, he points out the obvious visible tool marks on the stone.
Under the arms and between the legs where the acid didn't fully eat away the chisel lines, you can see where steel tools were used.
He essentially says, look right here. You can see the modern tool marks.
Yes. Furthermore, Marsh firmly states a basic law of geology and chemistry: flesh does not turn into solid gypsum.
The process of fossilization replaces bone with minerals over millions of years, but it doesn't turn soft tissue into a massive block of calcium sulfate.
And stone does not magically take the form of flesh without leaving structural evidence of the original skeleton. It is a biological and geological impossibility.
He famously declares it of very recent origin and a most decided humbug.
The scientific consensus rapidly and decisively shifts to confirm it is a modern carving.
The game is up.
The scientific scrutiny is mounting, the evidence is undeniable, the press is turning, and in December 1869, just a couple of months after the initial discovery, George Hull decides to come clean.
He publicly confesses to the entire scheme. He lays out the whole timeline for the press.
The argument with the preacher in Iowa, buying the gypsum, the secret Chicago stonecutters, the acid baths, the needles, the midnight burial, the year-long wait.
He admits with immense pride that it was all an elaborate, expensive joke.
He essentially stands up on a national stage and says, "I told you so." He proved his point about human gullibility beyond his wildest dreams, and he made a fortune doing it.
But here is the punchline. This is the part of the story that I find the most mind-boggling, the part that really speaks to human nature.
The confession makes national news. Everyone in America reads that the Cardiff Giant is a proven, admitted fraud. The creator himself said, "I carved it." The top scientist said, "It's a fake."
So logically, you would think the crowds would vanish overnight, right? Everyone packs up, feels deeply embarrassed that they were duped by a cigar maker, and goes home.
But they don't. The crowds keep coming. In fact, people flock to see the admitted fake with just as much enthusiasm as before.
The motivation for the visit simply shifts. They transition from paying to see a divine miracle to paying to see a masterpiece of deception.
And it gets even weirder. Barnum's fake of the plaster replica sitting in New York City actually outdraws the original fake at times.
Even after everyone knows both of them are absolute frauds, people prefer Barnum's fake because it's conveniently located in Manhattan and it's promoted with Barnum's signature flair.
Hull himself realizes this incredible, enduring truth about the American public. There is absolutely no shortage of people willing to pay for the sheer pleasure of being fooled as long as the show is entertaining.
This raises an important question. Why do we enjoy being fooled once we know it's a trick?
The giant transitioned from a religious or scientific artifact into an object of pure entertainment. It became a monument to human audacity.
We admire the con, we admire the sheer ridiculous effort Hull put into tricking us.
The object itself lost its mystical power, but it gained a new kind of power as a cultural touchstone.
It's exactly like watching a professional magician or an illusionist. You know they aren't actually doing magic. You know the lady isn't really being sawed in half. You know it's a trick.
But you pay for a ticket to see how they trick you, to experience the flawless execution of the illusion.
The Cardiff Giant became the most famous magic trick in 19th century America.
And that legacy endures. The Cardiff Giant is still a major case study for folklorists, sociologists, and historians studying mass credulity.
It perfectly encapsulates a specific, volatile moment in the 19th century when science and religion were violently clashing.
When mass media, via the Telegraph and national newspapers, was just starting to connect the country.
And when sheer showmanship could completely outmaneuver empirical facts.
And amazingly, the story hasn't ended. The original fake Giant Hull's 3,000-pound gypsum masterpiece, the one that started it all, still exists today.
It didn't get destroyed or lost to history.
It is on permanent display at the Farmers Museum in Cooperstown, New York, and they don't hide its history, they celebrate it.
It is explicitly presented to the public as a brilliant, monumental historical hoax.
You can still go there today, pay your admission, and look at the exact same fake rock that fooled the nation in 1869.
So what does this all mean? Ultimately, this means George Hull achieved an absolute, unmitigated victory.
He set out to prove that people were gullible, that they would aggressively ignore evidence if a lie flattered their pre-existing beliefs.
He proved it so thoroughly and built such an enduring physical monument to that human flaw that people are still paying admission to see his fake giant a century and a half later.
Nobody in this story really comes out looking particularly clever or incredibly foolish. They just look fundamentally beautifully human.
George Hull was petty enough to spend a massive fortune on a personal grudge.
The public was eager enough to believe a fantasy that they ignored glaring reality.
The early scientists were swept up in the excitement and the pressure of the crowd.
Barnum was greedy enough to steal the whole concept and legalize the theft through a loophole.
The giant didn't fool geology. It fooled the deeply human desire to see the extraordinary confirmed right before our eyes in the familiar dirt of our own backyards.
It is a mirror reflecting our own cognitive biases back at us, carved in 3,000 pounds of gypsum.
But I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over.
George Hull had to go to extraordinary, exhausting lengths to exploit the confirmation bias of the 1860s public.
He had to mine tons of raw gypsum in Iowa, secretly ship it across the developing railway network to Chicago, hire secretive stonecutters, burn the rock with sulfuric acid, beat it with needles, bury it in the dead of night in New York, wait an entire year for the seasons to hide his tracks, and spend the equivalent of hundreds of thousands of dollars just to create his Cardiff Giant.
It was a massive, resource-intensive, highly risky undertaking just to create one convincing lie.
Today, we carry devices in our pockets capable of generating Cardiff Giants in a matter of seconds.
Deepfakes, photorealistic AI-generated images, fabricated news stories, algorithmic echo chambers, all of them tailor-made to perfectly validate whatever it is we already desperately want to believe about the world, our politics, or our enemies.
It takes no gypsum, no acid, no secret wagon rides in the dark, and no year-long wait.
So if George Hull proved in 1869 that people will literally line up and pay hard-earned money to be lied to as long as the lie feels right, what happens when the lies no longer cost a fortune to build but are generated for free, specifically targeted at you every single time you refresh your feed?
It is a sobering thought. The tools of deception have evolved incredibly, becoming frictionless and invisible. But the human brain, the ultimate target of the deception, is exactly the same as it was in 1869. We still want to believe.
So stay curious, keep your critical thinking sharp, and whatever you do, always remember to question the giants you find buried in your own backyard.